In this video series, I'm going to be breaking down every single kill team option for new players. We'll start off explaining what kill team is, and then I'll cover every single option we have in the game right now. For each of these teams, I'll do a rundown of the team's lore, but not in a lot of detail, just enough so you basically know what they're about, and know if there's something you might be interested in playing. Then we'll talk about how they actually play in-game. In this particular video, we'll be talking about the teams that are part of the Imperium of Man. The video after this will be Chaos, and then I'll finish with Xenos. So those will be coming out in the future. Let's go ahead and get started with what is Kill Team. Oh, and for the more veteran players, remember I'm explaining everything here like I'm talking to someone who doesn't really know what Warhammer really even is. Like they know it's a sci-fi game, and that's about it. So the details here might not be perfect, but I'm trying to use layman terms here and not overwhelm new players with details that they don't really care about yet. So Kill Team is a game set in Warhammer 40,000 universe that uses a lot of the same miniatures and pieces you need for Warhammer 40,000. Warhammer 40k is a sci-fi universe set in roughly the year 40,000. Besides sci-fi, the style is what's called grimdark, meaning basically that everything has gone wrong and feels pretty hopeless. Let me give you a quote that sums up grimdark from the 40k books. To be a man in such times is to be amongst the untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. These are the tales of those times. Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim dark future there is only war. There is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsty gods. So the main concept is there was this dude called the Emperor of Mankind. He created the Imperium of Mankind, created some near-immortal super soldier sons, called Primarchs. But in this big event called the Horus Heresy, half of the sons turned on him, and there was a big civil war. Well, after the civil war, everything just fell apart, and this universe is set in that fallout. And when I say fell apart, I mean there are demonic beings roaming around, evil super soldiers leading those demonic beings, basically a race of xenomorph knockoffs going planet to planet eating everything, fast corruption within every system. It's pretty damn bad. So what is Kill Team the game? And how's it different from Warhammer 40,000? The main difference is that Warhammer 40,000 is an army game, meaning you have big groups of soldiers with artilleries, tanks, aircraft, and big monsters. So you can have a lot of stuff going on. While Kill Team is what's called a miniature skirmish game. So you'll have somewhere around 7 or so models on the field, and you micromanage each one. Instead of giant armies clashing, think of this more as the special operation units behind the scenes. So you build, buy, and paint your own little models, and then you can play this very tactical game with them that takes about an hour. You can do anything from a narratively driven game with an ongoing story to a more competitive tournament-style game. And while it is based off of Warhammer 40,000, the rules are significantly different, so it's really its own game, not just mini 40k. It's just set in the same universe and uses a lot of the same models. So to sum that up, it's a sci-fi future, everything is horrible, and you're controlling what amounts to a special operations group to accomplish missions. So now that we have that way overly simplified breakdown, let's go over each faction. And we'll start with all the Imperium of Man factions for this video. So the Imperium are basically humans, well, mostly humans. It was the half of the galaxy that stayed loyal to the Emperor during the Horus Heresy. So the first and most iconic of these are the Space Marines, also known as the Adeptus Astartes. These are the super soldiers of the future. Think of Master Chief from Halo, but just more extreme. They're clad in power armor and are heavily genetically modified. They're not just big brutes though, they're very tactical and highly intelligent. One big thing with Space Marines is they are separated into different groups called chapters. Each group was based on a Primarch, which was one of the Emperor's sons who half went traitor that we talked about earlier. Each chapter has way different personalities and fighting styles. There are some that are more stealthy, like Raven Guard, who also have jump packs, or the Space Wolves, who are based off of Vikings, and they have Wolf Cavalry. Right now in Kill Team, the chapters do nothing as far as stats, so we won't really talk about them all here. But if you want to play Space Marines, you should look into the chapters, because that way you can paint up your minis to look like your favorite chapter. As far as playstyle in Kill Team, Space Marines are kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. They're decently tanky, they have decent wounds, decent damage, and they're a good mix of range and melee. You'll normally get 6 models, which is a little on the low side. Right now, the Space Marine teams, you only choose one type of Marine, like the heavily armored heavy intercessors, or the scout snipers, and you'll run only that type, so you can't mix and match the different types of armor here. One type that I really like personally is Deathwatch, which is the only chapter you can really play that has its own rules. These are veterans from other chapters, you've seen how horrible the alien attacks can be, and choose to leave their own chapter and join the Deathwatch to defend humanity from the xenos threat. They have a lot of different weapons and types of ammo that you can switch out in the middle of the game, so they have a lot of flexibility. In a lot of their weapons, you have multiple different ammo types, which I think is really cool. So the main negatives of Space Marines right now is they're pretty weak as far as competitive tier list goes. And they don't have that many rules, which is nice when you're first learning the game, but later on you'll want more abilities like the other teams have just so you have more options. So if you really like Space Marines, but you want a team that's a little stronger and has more abilities, our next team is for you, and that is the Phobos Space Marines. So the Phobos Marines are just regular Space Marines, but they have specialized armor called Phobos armor. This is just a more stealth-based armor than regular Space Marines, which Kill Team is all about sneaking around and trying to get the jump on your enemies, so it fits the theme really well. That's all there really is to say lore-wise, since they're literally just Space Marines in different armor, so let's talk about them in-game. The cool thing about Phobos compared to regular Space Marines is 1, the ability to mix and match what type of Marine you use, and 2, access to more abilities and specialized models. You can use Infiltrators, Intercessors, and Reavers in the Phobos team, so 3 different types, while for regular Space Marines, each type have to play completely separately. So because of this, you can get the special traits of each one of these all in one Kill Team. And the way they play is a little different from most normal Space Marine teams. While you have similar wound counts and model counts, your models can go between engage and conceal orders, which means you can stay hidden, pop out to attack, and then go back into hiding. So it's a more stealthy playstyle. You'll also have access to models like snipers, a medic, a model that can use mines, and some models that can make it harder for the enemy to pull off their plan. If you like the look of normal Marines but want a stronger, more stealthy version of them, the Phobos team is a great option. So our final Space Marine spin-off team will be the Grey Knights. So they're largely like your normal Space Marines, but they're very secretive. Almost no one even knows about them. Unlike the other Space Marine groups, none of them have ever fallen to chaos. So besides just being mysterious, they exist for one reason and one reason alone, and that is to hunt down demons and chaos. They never did involve in a civil conflict or anything like that. They are purely trying to keep chaos at bay. And one thing that allows them to do that is that every single member of the Grey Knights is a Psyker. So what Psykers are, it's basically 40k's equivalent to something like magic or the Force. It lets you do things like read minds, shoot lightning from your hands, standard space magic stuff. And in lore, Grey Knights can even use it to cast demons back to their realm. One reason that being a Psyker is typically risky is where your magic comes from is called the Warp, which is basically the realm of demons and demon gods. So you are opening yourself up to being influenced by them or it backfiring at you. So that's why a lot of people in the 40k universe don't like Psykers. In-game, the Grey Knight's abilities are pretty comparable to Space Marines as far as base stats. So most of them have Storm Bolters, which are like a wrist-mounted gun that's pretty strong, but that means their hands are freed up for a melee weapon. So they're really pretty good at melee and range combat. So the main thing that really makes them stand out are their Psyker powers. All of your Grey Knights will have access to 3 of them, and they're all used as stat buffs. 1 increases your ability to get shot at and not take damage. 1 gives your unit a shooting buff, and the other increases your damage in melee. Besides that, with their equipment, you can do stuff like either deny an enemy Psyker power, or deal extra damage to other Psykers or demons. So if you like the idea of a Space Marine team that has the flexibility of all those Psyker powers, and has the lore of being a secret organization that hunts down demons, Grey Knights are a good team for you. Next up, we'll be talking about the Astra Militarum, also known as the Imperial Guard. So the Imperial Guard is as close to a modern military as you'll actually get in the 40k universe. For the most part, they are just normal humans. They don't have the crazy power armor or the superhuman genetics of the Space Marines. They are just dudes, but they're well trained and there are a lot of them. Their base rifle is called a lasgun, which gets joked about being called a flashlight because it's not very powerful compared to everything else in the universe. Like, it will kill someone, it's better than any of our modern real-world weapons, but everything in 40k is so crazy powerful, it's weak comparatively. So as far as style, a lot of it will look like the First World War as far as clothing and weapons, and a lot of their tactics are similar to World War II. In normal 40k, they have a lot of artillery, transports, tanks, machine gun nests, stuff like that you can set up. Basically, anything that the real world has, you can run in the Imperial Guard. And like how the Space Marines have their chapters, the Imperial Guard has regiments that all look and act pretty differently from each other. For example, the Death Corps Krieg are all in gas masks and trench coats, and will throw away their life without hesitation, like they want to die in battle. And then there are the Cadians, who always have the best gear and everything is following regulation. But then they're struggling with their honor after the fall of their planet. And you have the Catachans, who are basically just crazy Rambo fighters from a jungle planet. So there's a lot more, but we won't go into them all here. If you want to play kind of a standard, regular human military force, you'll probably find a regiment you like. And something else about their lore, I think that the Imperial Guard probably have the best books if you want to start reading them. A lot of that comes from them being normal humans. They struggle with fear and panic when a demon shows up in front of them. They have their pride. Like, members of the Imperial Guard will fall in love. They'll get angry and lose their cool at a comrade. It's one of the only fashions that you can really tell a normal human story and have normal human emotions. So some of the writing and the characters are very relatable. Now, as far as playing them in Kill Team, you have a lot of models, but they'll all be pretty weak overall. You have two choices of models here. Either Standard Guardsmen or Tempestus Scion. They act pretty similarly, except that the Tempestus Scions are just more elite models with a little more damage and a little more health, but you get a couple less of them. And the Scions look really cool. That's highly important in picking your faction. They're supposed to be like the Special Forces drop troopers, so a lot of people really like that on their team. So the strategy with Imperial Guard is you have a lot of guys to move around and take objectives, and a lot of guys take shots at your opponents. And because you have so many models on the board, if you need to sacrifice someone to get the job done, well, you have the human resources to spare. One thing that makes this team different than others is you have what are called Guardsman Orders. This is basically where your sergeant can give an order that will buff your entire team. And then you have a communication guy that relays it to everybody else. Because you have so many models, even a small buff can have really big effect. But because of this, your sergeant and your communication guys are pretty high value targets, so you have to keep them safe. For the other teams, your leader matters, but not as much as they do here. So a spin-off to the Imperial Guard team is the Veteran Guard. The lore is basically the same, so let's talk about them. So the Veteran Guard is basically just a veteran group of Imperial Guard. The reason this matters in game is that your troopers have had time to specialize, so you get a lot of really cool choices. And before I dive in, the Vet Guard team is typically thought of as just stronger than the normal Guardsmen, as far as like meta goes. Just because you have more specialized models, so you have more options. So if you care about having a competitive team, normally this one is better. Like the Imperial Guard, you'll get a lot of models who are all individually pretty squishy, but here each one can basically have a different role. For example, you'll have a sniper you can stay hidden and pick off targets. And then you can have a spotter to pair up with them. You have a medic, which is fairly rare in Kill Team. Besides that, you have some models that are a little bit tankier, or models that are specialized in melee. Not counting standard troops, I think there are 10 different models to choose from, so you have a ton of options. So the Vet Guard also have their Guardsman Orders, which work just like the normal Guard basically, but they also have ancillary support. This is where you can either take additional troops, or do stuff like call in missile strikes or artillery barrages. So that's not as devastating and powerful as it sounds, but it can be some free damage and really help you out if you time it right and pick your targets well. So if you want to play Imperial Guard and want more options, Vet Guard is a really cool way to do that. And a final note here, if you actually buy the Veteran Guard set, The models are all done up like the Deathcore of Krieg, which those are the guys that have the gas masks and the trench coats. I love how they look, and in the books, they're absolutely amazing. So you'll end up with some really cool minis. Next up, we are talking about the Talons of the Emperor. So this team has two parts. The first is the Adeptus Custodes, and the next is the Sisters of Silence. The reason these two teams are paired together is they are the two groups that can freely roam around the palace on Holy Terra, which is the main Imperium planet, and it holds the living corpse of the Emperor. That's a whole thing I'm not diving into in this video, but basically it's the most holy and important site for the Imperium in all of 40k. So we'll start with the Sisters of Silence. Remember how I explained what a Psyker was earlier, and how they were connected to the Warp? Well, a Sister of Silence is basically the total opposite of that. They are a blank, or what's called a null. They don't assist the Warp, and therefore are anti-Psyker. So normal people will feel really uncomfortable around them, while Psykers can actually just lose their minds. So they're used to hunt down witches and Psykers who are a threat to the Imperium. In Warhammer games, how this typically works is if they're nearby, enemy Psykers just can't use their abilities at all, and they have the ability to deal extra damage to Psykers. The other half of this kill team are the Adeptus Custodes. So you know how earlier I was saying Space Marines are super soldiers, and they're just way beyond what normal humans are? Well, the Custodians are like a step beyond that. They were originally created to be the personal bodyguards of the Emperor, and now they guard the palace on Holy Terra. So unless it's a critically important mission, they almost never leave the palace. These guys are about as elite as you can go in kill team. For normal Warhammer 40,000, the only armies that run less models are Knights, who are these giant mecha walkers. So they're basically walking tanks as far as power goes. So let's talk about these teams in kill team. The Sisters of Silence are on the weaker side as far as individual models, but you get a decent number of them. Similar to how Imperial Guard is. For each Sister of Silence, you can take either a flamethrower, a rifle, or a greatsword. So you can really pick what range you want to fight at based on what your opponent's running. But the real reason to run them is the anti-Psyker. So there's not a lot of Psyker abilities in kill team, but if there are, they're normally really strong. So having a counter to that is awesome. The other side of this team are the Custodes. If you run only Custodes, you get 4 models, which is really small. Not a lot to work with. But each individual one is a monster. So you have 2 weapon setups for Custodians. One is where they're more of a close range combat situation, but they have a storm shield. So this gives you a better defense against armor piercing attacks, and it makes you stronger in melee. Or you have a Guardian Spear, which being a spear means it's good in melee, but it's also really strong as a long range weapon. So a great thing with this kill team is you can run both. So you can take 2 Custodians and 5 Sisters of Silence. This is an awesome way to run them if you want the power of the Custodians but don't want to be as limited on models, or if you really like the Custodians but the enemy has Psykers you want to shut down. And they have a really cool ploy called Talons, where you can activate 1 Custodian and 1 Sisters of Silence at the same time, and they move at the same time. So that can really throw off an opponent. Next up, we have the Adeptus Sororitas, also known as the Sisters of Battle. The Sisters of Battles are basically the military arm of the church in 40k lore. And it's an all-female military organization. So they aren't superhuman or have any special powers, but they are given the absolute best warrior they can be given. They're put into power armor, and they're trained to the peak of human ability. So while they aren't genetically super soldiers, they are insanely skilled and dangerous. Visually and lore, they have some awesome looking minis. Their taints are like church organs on wheels, and they have a ton of religious symbology. They have one of the coolest themes in all of 40k. Like with all of these, I'll have a lot of B-roll on screen to show what they look like, but visually they're great. They'll also use a lot of religious relics and prayers to the Emperor while in battle to boost their strength. So there are 2 Sisters of Battle teams, and we'll talk about the original one here first as far as gameplay goes. So you'll have 10 operatives, so it's fairly average as far as strength versus numbers ratio, and you have a choice of 3 types of models which can affect how they play. The main one that most people use and the most iconic are the Battle Sisters, and the Battle Sisters are my personal favorite ones. So the standard Battle Sister just has a bolt gun, which is a fairly standard long-range weapon. But they did a gunner, a heavy gunner, and a leader, which can open up the door for flame weapons and meltas. Meltas are anti-armor and really do some reliably high damage to most models. Besides the leader, they aren't great in melee though, so that's their main weakness. Next up is the Sister Repentia. These are battle sisters who have failed or are disgraced and trying to repent, so they don't have any armor and just have melee weapons. They do some decent damage in melee, but they have zero protection from range attacks. With these, you have to get up close and get to your enemy before they can shoot at you. And the final option here is the Arco-Flagellant. These are people who committed heresy who are rigged up with cybernetics and melee weapons, and are just mindless killing machines. Because they have sensory suppressors and robotic parts, they're harder to kill than the Repentia, but they do comparable damage. So the bad part with this option is they can't do any kind of mission actions, so they're only for combat. And because of this, your entire team can't be composed of them. So if you want to run these, you have to pair them with either Battle Sisters or Repentia. So the other kill team you can run with the Sisters of Battle are the Novitiates. These are basically the novice sisters you still need to take their vinyl vows to become normal Battle Sisters. For the lore, they're not much different than regular Sisters of Battle, so we'll just kind of jump right into the gameplay. This team has a lot of special options that you can take for your models, such as an anti-psyker option, some melee specialists, and a medic. There's several of them, but just know basically all of them have different special abilities. But what really makes this team different is their faith mechanic. So basically you get faith points just for doing different things throughout the match, and for having models on the board. And throughout the match, you'll constantly be spending and gaining these points to change up the game. Thematically, it's like miracles are happening to change the tide of battle in your favor. There are 8 different options when you spend these points. I won't go over all of them here, but you can do stuff like change fail rolls to successful ones, or do things to ignore mortal wounds, which is a pretty rare skill in Kill Team. And you can even heal yourself with them. So that's their main gimmick, but if you get really good at knowing how to manage these points, it's really powerful. So if you like the idea of being able to kind of change odds in your favor, and the lore of Sisters of Battle and the visuals, this is a really good team to run. So our final team that's currently released from the Imperium is Admec, which is short for Adeptus Mechanicus. Specifically, we're talking about the Hunter Clade kill team here. So the Admec are all about worshipping machines. Let me read you a quote from their creed. "There is no truth in flesh, only betrayal. There is no strength in flesh, only weakness. There is no consistency in flesh, only decay. There is no certainty in flesh but death." So this faction is based on Mars, and they don't really worship the Emperor like the rest of the Imperium, but instead they look to what is called the Omnissiah, which is basically the machine god. They are the technical branch of the Imperium, and make all of the cool weapons, vehicles, and even the power armor. But they don't just do this by understanding technology, but by blessing the machine spirit that lives in those devices. So it's a blend of technology and religion, but in 40k that's how it works. Because of this, most Admec people, and I'm using the term people loosely here, are almost entirely machine. Like that quote at the beginning, flesh is weakness and they want to remove it. So they're all about augmentation and technology. A weird caveat to this is they don't really develop new technologies though. A lot of this stuff is forbidden, like artificial intelligence. This is because there was a huge war where AI turned on humans in the older history of 40k, so the Admec are really careful not to let that happen again, and almost overly careful because of it. So just because the Admec are nerds of the 40k universe, doesn't mean they don't have giant armies or their own specialized military models. They have some of the best war gear, and the Imperium armies wouldn't function without them. They're not to be taken lightly when it comes to combat. There are entire books where the fighting is only Admec models. So as far as how you play them in Kill Team, you'll have 11 models, which is a little more on the Horde side than a lead. But that doesn't mean they aren't all fairly powerful on their own. They're not very tanky, but their offense is really good, especially at range. Your team will mostly be Skitarii, which is like the standard trooper for the Admec. They're primarily going to have range weapons, and a lot of them have pretty big guns. Think of the Kill Team equivalent to an elephant gun, and that's what some of them will have. And even the normal Admec soldier is pretty accurate. So for those models, their weakness is melee in close combat. So they don't have a lot of health, and they don't really have any specialty melee weapons. But another model choice you have are the Sicarian models like the Ruststalker that only do melee. A lot of them have buffs against being shot at, they're tankier than their ranged counterparts, and they have really high melee damage. Because of this, you're not only a shooting team. This team has a lot of cool equipment too, like the ability to do mission actions for free, or ways to give yourself more command points to do more ploys. They have a lot of options depending on if you want to focus on combat or missions, so you can really give each model its own thing to do. And this team also has their own gimmick that's called the Imperatives. These are hard to use at first, but they can be really powerful if set up correctly. So basically your team always has a team-wide buff, but they also have a team-wide negative. You can change these as the battle go and you have 5 options. So a good sample of one of them is if you roll 2 failures for your defense dice, you can re-roll 1. But all of your models move 2 inches less, so you gain defense but lose speed. Use this at the right time when you're already in position and want a shooting fight, and you can really increase your odds of surviving, but have this active and needed across the board while you're about 30% slower so you won't get there. There are ways to ignore these negatives, but you constantly have to be changing up your strategy or finding some other way around it. This team has a ton you can do with it, and if you learn all of their abilities, you'll have a ton of flexibility. So the last team I want to mention is a new team we're getting in the Kill Team Into the Dark set, which isn't out while I'm making this video, and that will be the Imperial Navy Breachers. So we don't know exactly how they'll play, but I'll put us some B-roll so you can see the models. So the Imperial Guard is the main ground force in the Imperium of Man, and the Navy is the main space force. So they mostly operate on ships and do a lot of the logistical moving and air support for the Imperial Guard. So in the game, 40k, they don't actually have their own army, so this is a kill team only option. So this team will be the Breachers, which are a special group that boards other crafts, or will go check out abandoned ships. Like in the set they're being released in, they're going to check out an abandoned area, and find a race of xenos are also on that ship, and they have to fight them. So we know they'll mostly use shotguns as their main weapons, and they have some cool technology like a controllable skull that's packed with explosives that you can send at the enemy. And they have a little small robot drone that can scout out areas for you as well. So these guys are like a shotgun heavy SWAT team. We just don't know all their roles yet. So I'll have the next part of this video series out within the next couple of weeks, and that will be every Chaos team. Once it's out, I'll have it linked here on the end screen as well if you're watching this like a few weeks after it came out. If not, subscribe so you can see when those come out. Thank you for watching.